Hello, everyone, and welcome to tonight's Save Our Seas Foundation Distinguished Speaker Series. My name is Lance. We're going to get started in a few minutes, so just sit tight, enjoy. We'll get started soon. Thanks for being here tonight.
Sharks and rays. They are often dismissed as monsters of the sea. But these majestic, enigmatic creatures are actually essential wardens of our marine environment. Found in every ocean across the world, they play a fundamental role in ensuring balance and stability in our oceans. Sadly, this role is jeopardized by overfishing and habitat loss. Around 3 billion people rely on fish as their primary source of protein. Ongoing declines in shark populations could have devastating and unpredictable impacts on marine food webs, and even our own food supply. The plight of sharks and rays was the spark for the Save Our Seas Foundation, founded over 15 years ago. Through the funding and support of research, conservation, and education initiatives, we are dedicated to safeguarding the future of sharks and rays. Today we have 3 centers based in Seychelles, South Africa, and the USA. Since 2003, we have funded over 300 projects on over 60 species in over 50 countries. We have also partnered long-term with several projects, including the Shark Spotters in South Africa, the Shark Lab in the Bahamas, and the Manta Trust. We're passionate about our mission: protect the future of sharks and rays and our oceans for generations to come. We can and will make a difference. The Save Our Seas Foundation.
I used to actually be terrified in any water where I couldn't see the bottom. Tales of monsters lurking in the deep. What are these enigmatic, crazy creatures? The first recognizable ancestors of sharks existed before trees, whereas now they could be facing collapse in a single generation. I actually think it's very hard to know just how much you love something until you lose it. Grief is the price we pay for love. The thing that drove me on this path was a pure passion for the animals themselves. I didn't start out wanting to save them because I didn't know that they needed saving or help. I realized that if we want to help save sharks, we need to make sure they have safe places to live in.
Sharks and rays. They are ancient, enigmatic, misunderstood, and essential to our oceans. But these important animals are under immense pressure. As the Save Our Seas Foundation, we're here to help. Through supporting research, conservation, and education, we work to ensure a future for sharks and rays. The Save Our Seas Foundation. Together, we can make a difference.
Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to tonight's Save Our Seas Foundation Distinguished Speaker Series. My name is Lance. I am the Director of Environmental Sustainability here at the Museum of Discovery and Science. in sunny South Florida. We're so happy to have you all here tonight. Tonight we're bringing you another fantastic speaker, shark researcher, that's going to be telling you all about their research and answering your questions. First, though, a little bit about the Museum of Discovery and Science. We welcome anyone and everyone to come and visit. If you find yourself in Fort Lauderdale, here's our lovely museum. Here at the museum, our mission is to connect people to inspiring science, and we do that along 4 different categories of education: physical science education, early childhood education, health and wellness education, and tonight, environmental sustainability. We're bringing that to you this evening with a focus on sharks and shark conservation and shark research. Tonight, we are graced with Dr. Ana Martins. Ana will be joining us this evening for the talk. And she's one of several Save Our Seas Foundation funded researchers. Thanks to the Save Our Seas Foundation for funding such wonderful work, research and education, and this series. Born and raised in São Luís in northeastern Brazil, Ana developed a fascination for sharks and rays at an early age while playing on the beaches along the Brazilian coastline. Ana completed a Bachelor's of Science in Biological Sciences and a Master's in Science in Biodiversity and Conservation at the Federal University of Maranhão, there in Brazil, studying the supply chain and conservation status of sharks based on their traditional fisher knowledge. Next, Ana pursued a PhD at James Cook University in Australia, where she integrated biotelemetry approaches and stable isotope analysis, a little bit of genetics, to refine the ecological roles of juvenile stingrays in coral reef ecosystems. Ana is now a postdoctoral researcher at Dalhousie University and the iFisheries lab in Canada, working on a multi-year project that aims to unravel the global shark meat trade. Currently, Ana is focusing on areas of spatial and trophic ecology, human dimensions of fisheries resources, and sustainability and conservation of sharks and rays, especially in developing nations that have multifaceted socioeconomic and cultural structures. So, Dr. Martins, we're pleased to have you tonight. Thank you for joining. How are you?
I'm very good. Thanks, Lance, for having me. I'm really excited.
We're excited to hear about your research. You know, that your research is a much needed thing, I think. You know, of course, I'll let you give all the details and everything, but looking at the importance of fisheries to lots of different communities across the world, and how we can, harvest fisheries in a sustainable way is extremely important. So we're so happy to have you. Tonight, while Dr. Martins is getting her presentation up, you can go ahead and share your screen now if you want. Just a reminder to everyone that has joined this evening, if you have any questions, please feel free to ask. Put them in the chat. I will see them and ask them on your behalf. Don't be shy. Ask them as we're going through. If you have a question, go ahead and put it in there. There will be some time at the end for some Q&A, but there'll be some conversation happening here and there throughout Dr. Martins' presentation. So yeah, take it away. Tell us all about your research.
Well, dude, thanks so much, Lance. Thanks everyone for being here. It's a pleasure. Today, I'm going to talk a little bit about the projects that I've been working over the past year or so that is funded by the Save Our Seas Foundation. And it's called Food Security Benefits of Shark and Ray Nutrients. But before we get to the nutrient part of it, which is a bit of a niche kind of research, I think it's important that we take a couple of steps back to talk about shark and ray fisheries and trade, and for how long this has been happening, where it's happening, and let's dig in, talk a little bit about this before we go ahead. Lance already made a fantastic introduction. I don't need to talk much about this, but just to go on, I'm a postdoc at Dalhousie University in Canada, and that's what I've been developing this project. So when we talk about shark fisheries, that's where everything starts, right? That's where the product is first caught before it passes it on to different trade routes and gets to the consumer table. So even though we started to hear more about shark fisheries, I would say in the past few decades, this is something that is happening since the beginning of civilizations. I'm just going to make a parenthesis here real quick, just to say when I talk about sharks, I'm generally talking about sharks and rays as they are part of the same family group. And there are very similar biological characteristics. So yes, there are records of consumption of shark or ray meat dating back to 5,000 years ago, and also the use of these animals as part of celebratory ceremonies or religious or cultural ceremonies dating back for the Mesolithic and the Neolithic, which is pretty interesting. And when you talk about shark fisheries, it's not something very specific. It's not just one way of catching sharks and rays. I think depending on where you are in the planet, those fisheries can look completely different. They can not just in terms of different boats or different gears, but also in terms of the composition and the species that are part of this fishery, the species that people target, the species that are caught incidentally. And for sharks and rays, in most cases, they are caught incidentally. So let's say you have a big net that is focusing on getting mackerel or I don't know, something else. You're going to catch the species that you want, but you're also going to catch a lot of other things, right? And generally, that's the case for sharks and rays. There are some countries in the world that have specific fisheries for sharks and rays, but that's not much of the norm. Mostly, they are caught incidentally.
And the term that our guests may have heard about this is called bycatch, right? So
Exactly.
it's when you
Yes.
catch all of the things that you maybe don't want to catch. And there are, like you were saying, there are certain regulations about these kind of things. You might find marine mammals are especially protected across a lot of areas, dolphin-friendly tuna and this kind of thing to limit bycatch. But
Exactly.
sharks and
Exactly.
rays have been kind of overlooked in some areas, but.
Yes, there is a strong body of research that's trying to develop new technology so you can focus your fisheries only on the target species. But most parts of the world still don't have the access to those things, and bycatch is a massive issue globally. Yeah.
Right.
And um, so as we already know, if you care about marine animals, you probably already heard about this, that sharks and rays are facing several threats of extinction. They really are in trouble. And we can mention some of those issues, such as habitat loss, so the fact that we're destroying uh, both terrestrial and marine environments is a big issue for sharks and rays, pollution, climate change, but by far, no questions asked, the main issue we face is overfishing. This is affecting every single species of sharks and rays anywhere in the world. There are some older estimates and some more recent estimates that tell us that about 80 million sharks are captured every year, which is kind of a lot, especially if you consider they're not the target of most of those fisheries. And this has led to almost one third of all species of sharks and rays being threatened with extinction to some level. And in some particular cases, with some species, we have recorded population declines of up to 95%, which is massive. As an example, I can give you the case of the sawfishes, which had a pretty wide distribution globally. And I don't know if you've seen or heard of sawfishes before. It's actually a ray, but it has the shape of a shark and it has a massive saw in front of its face that gets entangled quite easily in fishing nets. So it's some there's a group of 6 species and they are very vulnerable to net fishing because of that. And they used to be distributed all over the world, and now there's only a few hotspots where you can find this species, and mostly due to overfishing.
Yeah, we're lucky enough here in South Florida to have one of those spots in
Exactly.
Biscayne Bay and Florida Bay and Everglades National Park here in South Florida. You can, if you're lucky, you can find small tooth sawfish there.
Yeah, one of the few places in the world.
Yeah.
So definitely very lucky. And why do people fish for sharks? Um, there are many reasons. There are social and cultural relationships that we're not going to focus too much about today because we're focusing on fisheries and trade. And this it's intrinsically related to the profitability of the market, right? So let's talk a bit of economics here. So when we talk about fisheries of sharks, generally people think that's people catch sharks because of their fins. And that's true. There's a market, a big market for shark fins. It was particularly big about 10, 15 years ago, has been declining since, still happening, still a problem. But it has declined a little bit over time. And it's a market that is estimated in something about 1.5 billion US dollars from 2012 to 2019, which is the most recent data we have. And one of the things that I believe it helped us to have a better understanding of this market is that there are specific trade hubs, like international locations where most of the shark fins are sent to. So that makes I'm not going to say easy, it's really hard still, but it's less difficult if you have only a few locations to research. Like if you focus your research on those specific points, that helps you to have a better sense of the whole dynamics of the market. And that's the case for the shark fin trade. The shark meat trade, on the other hand, it's bigger than the shark fin trade, estimated in about 2.6 billion, but we don't know much about it. We don't hear much about it. And for some reason, it doesn't make the headlights as much as the shark fin trade. But it's as complicated, it's even more complicated because there's no specific routes. Like pretty much every coastal country will have their preferred ways of distributing this product. And it's really hard to trace it, and it's poorly understood. And it's just, yeah, quite a big of a problem.
Can I ask a question about those two numbers?
Absolutely,
This,
yes.
this might be outside of your specialized knowledge, but that how do these two numbers, 1.5 billion for the shark fin trade, 2.6 billion for shark meat, how does that compare to tourism around sharks that don't end up with a negative impact on the sharks? Do you have?
Yeah,
It's an
I don't
interesting
have,
kind of thing to think about. Is like how does it compare to tourism of sharks? Is that that's larger?
yeah.
It's kind of interesting.
Um, I don't have the number right now from the top of my head, but I think the thing to have to take into consideration in terms of tourism, that it does bring some good revenue and it brings benefits of keeping the sharks alive, but it's not something that works everywhere, right? Like you need specific conditions to be able to provide a good tourist experience. While the shark meat is something that can happen anywhere in the world. So um, I don't have the numbers to show you, but what I'm just trying to say is that yes, tourism is it's a great way of arguing that we should keep sharks alive, but it's not always the case for many
Right,
places where you have murky waters or just not a structure of
right.
hotels and things to
Yeah,
bring
that makes
people in.
sense. Yeah.
Yes.
So we had a question, and you might answer this later on in your presentation from someone in the audience, but talking about are there specific like penalties for certain countries will may have restrictions, of course, on shark finning
Yes.
and shark consuming sharks. Not so much on consuming sharks, but I know on shark finning.
Yeah.
So compared to like the United States, compared to where you do a lot of your research, how do the system to govern these kind of things compare?
Yes. I think those days, most countries will have some level of legislation to protect sharks and rays. For example, finning, it's prohibited in most countries those days. I think the main issue comes with compliance.
Right.
I'm going to use Brazil as an example. We do have a set of laws and environmental legislation that prohibits spinning and the capture of threatened species, doesn't allow targeting for sharks and rays. But Brazil is a massive country, it's a massive coastline, and making sure that this is enforced, I think, is the main issue, rather than the legislation itself.
Right.
So there's lots of illegal fishing of sharks and ray happening, but on the other hand, there's also a lot of legal fishing of sharks and ray happening because we don't have the data, we don't have the information happening fast enough to turn those data, turn this research into legislation. So it's a bit of both illegal and legal fishing.
All right. Okay. Thank you.
No worries. And yeah, even though it still might sound weird to some people that lots of places and people consume shark meat. It's something that's been happening, as I said, since the beginning of times, and it pretty much happens everywhere. Every coastal country, to some extent, will have some level of consumption or trade of sharks, even if they don't intentionally want to catch those. They will end up doing it. And some countries even have specific dishes or they're made with either shark or ray meat that are part of the traditional cuisine or their culture to some level. But overall, it's a source of protein that is consumed in most places of the world, especially in coastal communities. Um, if it's everywhere, I think it's fair to ask why don't we hear much about it? Why don't we know much about it? And I think the main issue is that understanding both shark fisheries and trade, it's something really complex and really diverse. And there are many issues that we face when we try to look closely into the shark meat trade. We could talk about it all day, but I'm going to focus on 6 of them that I think are really interesting. It's starting with the lack of data. I think there are researchers that starting for like decades ago to look into this problem, but the problem didn't hit the mainstream until fairly recently, I would say 1 or 2 decades ago. And I highlight this as well. The funders are a big part of this as well, because back in the day, there was this sharks are just cool animals. It's nice to look at their ecology. It's like it's nice to look at their movements. But there wasn't that much interested in looking at dead sharks in a nearby port, right? So I think it took a while for us as a general public to realize that this was a massive issue that needed attention. So we don't have a lot of data on a global scale. Obviously, you have countries that will have good information, like the US does have lots of fishery statistics. It has some government reports that help us understand how the fisheries and the trade work in the country, but most countries do not have that. So it makes it really difficult to look at shark meat trade from a global perspective when you actually don't have any data to look at. Another massive issue we face is mislabeling. For some reason, shark meat is not often traded under the name of shark or ray. Um, there's cases where it's traded under genetic names. I'll use Australian as an example here. They call it flake. So you have fish and chip that it's flake fish and chips. It's shark. But a lot of the people that are consuming that don't really know that those are shark species. And there's also the case where shark meat is just processed, cut in fillets or steaks. Maybe sometimes they remove the skin, and it could be anything, right? So you can name it as a different species that probably has a higher cost. So maybe you can say it's mackerel, maybe you can say it's tuna, and make a little bit more money out of that. So mislabeling is a massive issue when it comes to trade. And it's a bit of a similar issue with the commodity codes. Commodity codes are like a code, like a number that is used when something is traded internationally. So anything you want to trade internationally, it has to be reported under a code, under a specific number. Doesn't matter if it's beef or a cell phone. if you're sending from country A to country B, it needs to be reported under a specific code. And for sharks and rays, we don't have many of those codes. You can actually distinguish between a shark and a ray, and a fresh and a frozen product, but that's about it. So all the information we may have in terms of the composition, what species and the proportion of the species that are involved in the trade gets lost once we only have this reported into this very few commodity codes.
That's really
Uh,
interesting. Does the do other fisheries have more specific codes like tuna or salmon or
yes,
something? Yeah,
yes, like the higher value, I guess, of the fishery, the more specific it tends to
right.
get. Um, but the other
Specific to
point,
species, right?
in some cases, it gets specific to species, yes. Um, it's a general problem. It's not like just for sharks and rays, but for sharks and rays, it's particularly interesting because they're talking about, 1,200 species that all get put into one commodity
Right.
code. And for other fishes, you have a bit more of resolution in that. Um,
That's
and
interesting. That I can see how that
yeah,
is a large issue to
and that's if we're lucky
understand
enough.
trade.
Yeah, and that's if we are lucky enough for people to report it as a shark, because they can also report it as a fish. So that we can, that's there's no way we can do anything about that. But yeah, it's quite complicated in that sense. And on top of that, it's not really well studied. It's picking up. It's really nice to see Safer Seas, for example, funding so many research on that area the past few years. But we still have lots of knowledge gaps. And just the simple fact that people have different cultures and different preferences in different places of the world, it already adds so much complexity to it, because the same fishery can be absolutely different, completely different from one place to the other. And I added here globalization as well, because I don't know, 20, 30 years ago, a product that was only available locally now can be shipped across the globe in half a day, because we have better transportation, better refrigeration, better ways of storing products than we did, back in the day. So all of that opens up the market so much and makes it so much more complicated to understand, I would say. So on top of all these issues and all these questions, I always had in the back of my mind, as I've been working on this on the shark meat fisheries and trade for almost 10 years, and I've been to many places and I've talked to many people. And I always been really interested in the consumption side of it. I always wanted to understand what makes a person go to a fish shop and pick shark meat rather than sardines or something else, right? Um, and one of the things, like within these main questions that I was really interested at, is that um, how much a piece of shark meat is actually contributing to people's nutrition. And looking into the literature, trying to find more information about it, I realized that there was not much out there. Um, there are some things we do know. If you look at the literature, you're going to find this heavily has been studied in many places. We know it is food, right? People eat it, people need it, people rely on it to some extent. So it is food. It is important. That's a fact. We don't have to dwell too much on that. The other body of literature that's pretty robust is that some species of sharks and rays do have high levels of bioaccumulants, that or toxins that can be harmful to human health, and highlight here mercury, for example. Some species will have especially species that are on the higher levels of the trophic cascade generally will have higher levels of mercury, and those are harmful to human beings. So we know that, and that's not what I'm going to go into it with this project. I actually want to know about the benefits. Like, is it really worth it eating shark meat, knowing that there are health risks? I wanted to know how much zinc, how much calcium, how much iron it's actually providing to communities, and if it's actually helping communities to remain healthy in their own realities and their own in terms of food security and nutritional fulfilling nutritional deficiencies.
Yeah, and just to touch just really quickly for anyone, the bioaccumulation is when certain elements will accumulate as you go up the food chain, right? So we all learned food chains and food webs in middle school probably, but the higher you are on the food chain or the food web, the food pyramid almost, we talk about trophic levels. The more of those elements will be in the tissue or the meat of these fish. So things that are super high, like sharks and swordfish, is the similar sort of situation. Tuna has high levels of mercury and other things too. And where it's interesting, and bioplastics is a new level of research with that as well, and how does plastic accumulate. But anyway, just a little explainer for our guests on what trophic levels and bioaccumulation mean. I know you're
That's
not
great.
focusing on that, but I just wanted to interpret. Thanks.
No, thank you for that. Yeah, and why do I think this is important? What's the rationale behind this idea of researching the nutrients? If we already know that it's food, and if we already know that they might have some health risks, sorry. I think just by the fact that we don't know much about it, I think that's already a very valid research question. I think any researcher that has the scientific curiosity in the back of their brain already, understand that this is a good reason to look for information. But on top of that, I personally have some aspects that I think are quite important. I think if you understand the nutritional value and the importance of this to communities, I think that help us understand motivations as well, why people are catching and why people are consuming this specific type of food. And I think this is particularly important because the markets for shark meat, they seem to continue to expand, even though populations have been declining. The markets are still opening up. So I think it's really important from a socioeconomic point of view to understand why people do this. And I come from a conservation background. I want sharks to have healthy populations, and I also acknowledge the fact that people need to find a way of living and also eat. So my main goal is also to provide new information and new angles that can potentially be used on a conservation perspective to help diminish this gap of understanding that we have in terms of what is important for food security and for economic need of fishers and traders and the community in general, relative to management of fisheries and conservation of sharks and rays.
When you think of the overall economy related to shark fishing, there's a question from someone in the audience about that. So sharks, of course, fins and shark meat for consumption. Are there any other fisheries for sharks or rays that don't include for food? I know way back when you could get squalene, which was shark oil, which is still to this day kind of used. But are there any other economic drivers besides just food?
There are many economic drivers. Again, because we have such a diverse world and cultures and stuff, it varies from place to place. But there are markets for shark oil, liver oil. There's market for skin, especially stingray skin, is a luxury market that's been
Yes.
developing. Teeth, jaws, many parts
How
of
do those
sharks and rays can
compare
be used.
to you estimated 2.6 billion for the meat market? How does
Yeah.
the other compare in size?
We don't have this number. We know it's much smaller, but we don't have
Okay.
this number, and we're gonna go back to the commodity code issue. If you're trading oil, you're gonna trade
Yes.
it on a fish oil. If you're trading teeth, I don't even know what commodity code you're gonna put that on. So that's really, we've tried with this project in the very beginning to look at different commodity codes, different
Right.
products, but the data on it, it's very scarce. Right. Do I have any more questions?
Oh, so no, sorry.
Okay, keep going.
No, that was it. That was it. So I just thought it was a really interesting question from one of our audience members.
Yeah, no, for sure. It's I think there's a group down in Tasmania now looking at using genetics to look at capsules of fish oil and see how much of actual shark is involved in and the composition of those things. But
Right.
and cosmetics as well. There's people looking if the squalene is coming from shark liver oil. But yeah, it's early days for this type of research.
And that's something, this is slightly off topic as we're going down this, but we'll get back. One thing you can think about whenever, from a consumer point of view, if you have cosmetics, you can look at the ingredients. And if it says squalene on it, SQUALENE, squalene, something like that, you know that your cosmetic has shark oil in it from the liver of the shark. So I'm not sure if you find that appealing or not. Maybe you'll switch your cosmetics to something else, but sometimes shark oil is used in that. But you can look for it. It actually will say on some of the ingredients.
Yeah. Oh, and most companies those days, because people have pressure a lot, they tend to provide the list of ingredients
Right.
very distinctively. And there are squalene that doesn't come from sharks. They can be produced in laboratory, but I think they're much more expensive. So some
Yeah.
companies tend to default to shark squalene. So if you see squalene, dig it a little deeper and see, double check if it's for sharks or if it's a vegan source or
Right.
whatever. But it's always good to check. That's a
Yeah.
good advice. It's always good to check and it's always good to ask.
Yeah. All right. Sorry, I drove us off topic a little bit. Go, please,
No,
please,
it's a
please
great
go on.
topic. It's a great topic. Yeah, so those are the reasons why I think understanding the nutritional content of sharks it's quite important. So the objective of my project in that sense was then to quantify how much nutrients they are essential to human health we can find in shark and ray meat, and we focus on six elements that are essential for our health, and those are calcium, iron, selenium, zinc, omega-3, and protein. And we looked at this in some of the most commonly consumed shark and ray species, and we selected a couple of nations to do that. And I'll talk about why we selected those in a second. And the idea is to estimate the amount of these nutrients on the shark and ray meat and have a new look at this content from a conservation perspective and try to make the connections between sustainability of shark fisheries and trade, as well as food security and nutritional security. So these are the countries that we chose for sampling, and we selected these places based on their history of either having a strong fishery for sharks and rays or a strong record of consuming sharks and rays. So we selected the US, Brazil, England, France, and Australia as the starting countries of this project. And we collected as many samples for as many species as we could in these places. And I highlight here some of the most commonly found species: thornback skate, blue shark, mako shark, and the spiny dogfish, which is particularly common in Europe. And in each one of those countries, we sampled tissue. Oops, someone is drawing on my slide. uh, we collected tissue. We visit fish shops in those places, and we collected the samples from those fish shops, and we made sure of two main things. One, that the fish, the shark and the ray were collected or caught locally. Um, they were collected in the same region of the fish shop. They were not internationally shipped from another country, and they had the specimens complete, so we could see and identify the species correctly. It wasn't just a steak or fillet, something that we couldn't tell exactly what the species we were sampling from. Once we achieved that, we have collected about 10 to 20 grams of each individual, and we send those to the lab. So here I'm actually based in Australia at the moment. I've been working remotely from here. And here in Australia, I was able to run the samples myself at the University of Adelaide with support of Dr. Camille Millin. But in the other countries, we have sent our samples to commercial laboratories. And that's basically where I am at the project right now, waiting for the samples to come back from the commercial lab so we can finalize our analysis and develop our estimates. And after that, we put all of that information into statistical modeling to help us understand and find the trends that we're looking for, and hopefully achieve our objectives in the upcoming months. And what do I expect from this project? I think this is a project that grew a lot on me over time, as the more I read about it, the more I tried to understand about it and talk to people about it, I realized how much more interested it was becoming to me. And a lot of questions have, I guess, were developed through the process of developing the project. But the main outcomes I'm seeking here is to generate these estimates of the composition of the contribution of shark and ray meat to on a global level to food security and nutritional security. And there are a few questions that I want to answer. I want to know if sharks and rays can be considered a good source of nutrition, if they're a good source of protein, a good source of omega-3, a good source of minerals. And if that's good enough to fulfill deficiencies in diet poor areas. And I want to know how much this compared to fish that people generally eat frequently, such as sardines, or salmon, or tuna, and if you're better off eating one or the other. And on top of that, I want to know if any benefits that the shark meat may have. I want to know if that will, overcome the fact that our health risks associated with consuming shark meat. Is it really worth it eating shark meat if we know there are some certain levels of things that can cause you harm? So those are the main questions I wanted to address with this project. There are many more that, as I said, have been developed over time. And if you want to know more about it, I'll keep you posted on my blogs on the Save Our Seas Foundation website, and I keep you updating things there. But these are the main outcomes that I have with this project. And before I finish the talk and take your questions, I just wanted to thank a lot of people. The core team of this project, the people that have been working directly with me over the year on this, and that I've been picking their brains way too much, I guess. But Dr. Erin McNeil, Christopher Mull, James Robinson, and Eva Marie. Huge thanks to these guys and the teams of experts have been working in Australia and Brazil as well, led by Dr. Camille Millin in Australia and Dr. Leandro Carvalho in Brazil. And lastly, a massive thanks to the Save Our Seas Foundation for making this project happen. I'm happy to take any questions you may have from now on. And thanks, Lance. You're the best.
Awesome. Well, it sounds like you have a really interesting project. And, as you go through your research, we'll have to have you back to tell us some of the results and
Absolutely.
some of the outcomes and some of the learnings that you're going to be coming across. So a few questions as we're going through. Let's see. So a little bit about you.
About me, sure.
Yeah, about you. How did you get involved in this? And then we can stop sharing if you want. How did you get involved in shark research? Kind of going over your journey and getting to where you are today. We have a lot of people that watch that are maybe pondering a career in ocean science or shark research. So yeah, just tell us a little bit about how you got to where you were and your kind of journey along the way.
Yeah, I've been all over the place actually. I'm originally from Brazil, and I've always liked animals, so I knew from early age that I was gonna study biology and towards, I guess, 10, 12 years old, I started to get really obsessed with sharks. At the time, I didn't know much about race. That grew on me over time. So I did a degree in biological sciences. At the time in my university, they didn't have any marine science courses. So I was just harassing the professors and asking to learn more about the marine environment.
You're being
And one
persistent.
of them, yes,
Persistence.
one of them was like, "All right, we can do a project on this. That's fine," even though it wasn't his area of expertise. But that's how it started. And I started by visiting the landing sites and the fishing ports near my hometown, and I learned like very quickly there was like, wow, there's a massive amount of sharks that are being landed here, and we don't really know why, we don't really know where they're going. No one is recording any data on this, and it was quite early on my undergrad that I realized that was a massive issue. And then you start reading about it and you start realizing that it's like, in fact, that's the main driver of declines in shark and ray population. So I just got really hooked on the topic from the beginning. But towards the end of my master's, and during my master's, I did a research where I traveled across the fishing communities on my home state and looked at the dynamics of the trade of different products there, shark and ray products there. And I think I got a little depressed at the time with so many dead sharks and I was like, all right, I want to try something different. So I decided to do a PhD in Australia where I could work with live animals, and I always wanted to do a bit of telemetry as well, which is basically, attaching some GPS tags to the animals to see where they go, how they move. I loved the experience, and I've always wanted to do it here and there, but it was very clear to me the fisheries. It's as being the main cause of issues with sharks and rays is what I wanted to focus my energy a bit more. So then I got a job in Canada as part of the Global Shark Meat Project as a
Mm.
4 to 5 years project that we've been looking at different aspects of shark meat trade. Um, and that's pretty much how I got involved, just like
Yeah.
acknowledging that that's the main issue for sharks and rays and trying to develop more research and more knowledge that can be hopefully be used in a helpful way.
That's really interesting in that you followed your questions almost like you had a question or you had an interesting observation, right? And that's, I mean, that's what science is answering questions, and yeah, and you've managed to make a career out of it, which is awesome. That's really fantastic. And being persistent, right? Persistence is important.
Yes, yes, yes.
If you want something, ask for it, and don't take no for an answer, maybe.
Yeah, I think it's a really something to have in mind. Like I come from a background, but I didn't have the support that I needed in terms of infrastructure resources to do the type of research that I had in mind. Um, so I really had to think outside the box. I really had to, establish collaborations and pursue things myself to be able to do this sort of things in my hometown. At the time, there was no research group and nothing really happening there. So persistence, uh,
And,
yeah,
and
pretty
creativity
important.
too, being able to collaborate, being creative, and well, so when you look at your project, and your persistence and creativity and all these kind of sort of things, how would they feed into expanding it, doing more? You know, if someone were to approach you with the blank check and said, "Here, do what you will with this and research what you want," how would you do
Yeah,
more? How would you improve? Um, would
you,
you do something
you
about those codes?
Yes, I would do something about those goods. But do you mean about nutrients or you mean about shark trade in general?
Yeah, and just in
Because I
whatever
think that'd be
whatever way that you
yeah,
would see this project as like the, the baseline, and then where would you take it from there
yeah.
after you get your results and get more learning from it?
Yeah, like on the nutrient side of it, I would. those nutrient analysis are really expensive, so we definitely were very limited by budget. So I would sample way more and way more places and way more species to have a bigger picture on the importance of those nutrients for sharks and rays for coastal communities and how this compares to health risks. In terms of shark trade and fisheries, I think the answer is it's not as complicated. Like we don't have much data, right? So we need to support research and monitoring, long-term monitoring of landings and trade sites in as many places as you can. So if I had a blank check, I would set up some monitoring teams in some of the key countries or all the countries if I have all the money
All right.
and make sure that happens. We really need solid data and consistent data on landings and trade. So that would definitely easy answer for me. I would just definitely develop a bunch of monitoring groups and different places of the world and keep that going.
Yeah, wait, so we've, through the Save Our Seas Foundation, the Distinguished Speaker Series, we've interviewed people from all over the world. And some of the most recent ones, and kind of related to the same issue, have been from Africa. And so communities in that part of the world, rely a lot on fishing, but in coastal
Yeah.
communities, and sharks in general. So, with that, I'm just kind of commenting on that, but are there any specific areas, like where is, you have monitoring teams or monitoring stations from various countries around the world, but where would you set up those teams to take that
Yeah.
research? Take that
Well,
data?
there's massive knowledge gaps in South America, Africa, and Southeast Asia, and some of the nations that consume a lot of shark ray meat. So I definitely start from there. Um, Even though Europe does have a lot of resources and at good levels of fisheries monitoring, it's also an area that consumes a lot of shark meat, and I don't think we have much information on that, on the
Right.
consumption side of it. So I would, yeah, also focus on the consumption in Europe
Yeah.
and just expand good monitoring programs we already have in the US, Australia, for example. Just expand on that. Yeah.
Yeah, that's cool. We have a few questions from the audience kind of rolling in.
Abs-
One asking question, kind of going back to the bioaccumulation issue
yeah.
with top predators of the ocean. Um, the water let me see how to phrase it. So the water that the sharks are swimming in, and these if toxins that are contributing to negative outcomes in their health, is that also factored into
Yeah.
kind of like these overall mortality rates of sharks? When you talk about 80 million plus sharks, dying every year, does poor water quality factor into that, or is it?
Not the level of like capture, because those are 80 million sharks that are captured every year.
Right.
So that's a result of fisheries. But in terms of the composition and like the bioaccumulants that we have on the shark tissue, that will vary drastically from place to place depending on the quality of the water.
Right.
There are like a very recent research that just came out that they found cocaine in shark tissue, and that is a result of cocaine being disposed in the water. So
I
depending on where
I
you
remember
are, you
seeing
can
that.
have
That was in
higher
Brazil,
levels.
I think, right?
Yeah,
Or yeah,
yeah, that was in Brazil. But
yeah.
there's many things, and the more polluted the water, like the more contaminants you can have on animals. So if you think of a trophic, um, like in an ecosystem and different organisms, they will have different levels. So
Yeah.
you have, for example, oysters. They will filter the water um, to feed. So that those oysters are gonna filter a lot of toxins as well, right? If the water is polluted, and the animals that will eat this oyster will carry some of this, and the animals that will eat the animal that ate the oyster will carry some of that until they get all the way to the top. So the water quality has a big influence on that, and that can be not necessarily in terms of toxins or bad things, but just even the quality of of the nutrients, the good nutrients as well, can be affected by the composition that you find in the water and in the
Right.
ecosystem that the animals are living at. Yeah.
So we have a little bit of time for a few more questions. Another question from our audience, does shark meat and ray meat differ from other fish meat, like structurally, since they have cartilage and bony fish have bones? Does their
Yeah,
meat look different? Or,
it can look different. It can look very similar. If you're taking just, let's say you have a small hammerhead shark, that's just an example, and you cut it as a steak. They do have cartilage, but the structure of the bone and of the cartilage and the location within the meat is very similar. So it'll be similar of a steak of like mackerel, for example.
okay,
If you look closely, you might be able to tell the difference. But if you were just average consumer and you go to the fish shop, or if you just see a fillet with no bones or no cartilage involved, it's really difficult to
right.
tell if it's
Yeah,
one or the other.
and shark meat typically is pretty dark in color, and that has to do with the amount of movement that they do and how much mitochondria are in their cells, right? If you
Yeah,
compare it to tilapia or something, which is not dark at all, they don't move a lot, but
yeah.
sharks are
Well,
constantly swimming, so they,
that's true for mostly for larger sharks that will have a lot of blood accumulated in their muscles. But you find some small species in coastal areas that don't move as much that will have completely white meat. It's
oh,
really
yeah,
can be really tricky to tell depending on the species. For the rays, I think it's a bit easier because they're flat and the you're gonna find a fillet that kind of looks like in a triangle shape.
yeah,
So it might be easier to identify it and than the sharks. But you get like I've been to fish markets that I wouldn't know. Like, and I've been doing this for several years, and you run a DNA sample and it's like, oh, it's actually shark. Like
yeah.
I wouldn't be able to tell.
One of the, that brings to mind one of the common, well, I'm not sure how common it is anymore, in the US even, for scallops to be marketed as scallops, but it's actually stingray or skate meat that they
Yeah,
take a little cookie cutter piece out of it and there you go, and call it scallop.
yeah. The
Yeah,
mini scallops they call it. I've read a bit about it. There's also the fake crab meat that is just a mix of white fish and sharks could be in there. DNA analysis have found shark meat in pet food. Honestly, it could be anything.
yeah. A question that just came in about specific path and kind of about your career path related to someone else's. They want some advice. So from
Okay.
college, what do you think is the best path towards doing field work or working in the marine world with marine animals?
Mm. Um, Connections. I think that's the key for everything. If you have the ability and the resources to volunteer and to search for opportunities outside of your area where you can connect to researchers from different places. I think all of my jobs and my moves in my career were through doing a good job with the people that I was working with, and then asking for their advice and making connections with other people and asking them to introduce me to other people. So I would go do a volunteer work, do a really good job, and then was like, hey, from here, do you have someone that you could, you know, introduce me to or some other opportunities that I could pursue? um, and I would move through that. So you do a good job, you work well with the people you're working with, and then try to expand your network. Going to conferences is always a good thing as well. But yeah, trying to diversify your skills is also really important. I think if you have more experience with fishing, animal handling, and all those things, just
Yeah,
and those things are going to pop up on your CV and help you be selected in some of those processes. But I think focusing on making connections and strengthening your relationships, doing your good work, being working with ethic, and people will help you move up and find you opportunities and field work or field stations or whatever you're pursuing.
Well, speaking of connections, how can we stay connected to you? If we
Ah,
want to follow your research or learn more about what you're doing, where can people go to find out more?
yeah, check out my profile on the Save Our Seas Foundation. I'll be as soon as I get more results, I'll be updating with blogs and posting about my results. I used to be on Twitter or X, whatever that's called, but that has recently been blocked in Brazil, so I haven't been using as much. So focus on the Save Our Seas for now, but and you hear a lot about my research.
Awesome. Well, Dr. Martins, thank you so much for being here and informing us all about your research. It's been a pleasure speaking with you tonight. Thank you.
Same. Thank you so much, Lance, and thanks everyone for being here.
Yeah. So next time, please feel free to come on back. We are having our next Save Our Seas Foundation Distinguished Speaker Series on September 19th, same time, same place. This time we'll be speaking with Aristide Kamla about some of the similar things that we've talked to Dr. Martins about tonight in genetics and combining this with community awareness and data collection in Africa, in Cameroon. So join us then. You can sign up by scanning the QR code that's here on the screen or going to mods.org/STEM Learning Series to sign up. And feel free to visit both of our websites, mods.org, saveourseas.com, to learn more about Save Our Seas and all their wonderful research and everything that they're doing. Thank you again to Save Our Seas Foundation for making this whole series possible. You can go onto the Museum of Discovery and Science YouTube channel and the Museum of Discovery and Science YouTube channel and find the whole series going back 2 years even of researchers from the Save Our Seas Foundation. So you can binge on a few episodes between now and then, between our next one. So with that, thank you again, Dr. Martins. It was a pleasure speaking with you, and thank you everyone for joining tonight. We'll see you next time.
Yeah.
Bye.